Okay, now you're supposed to be of the Gallowglass warriors of the Irish Scot people that became known as the Gallowglass warriors. Am I correct?
Yeah. So the Clan MacLeod was a Norse Gaelic clan that was founded around 1200, and they had long mercenary service in Ireland. The most significant campaign was in 1598, and that was one of the ones that there's lots of historical accounts of the Gallowglass warriors. And so the Gallowglass, some of the Gallowglass warriors were granted lands in exchange, and they stayed in Ireland. Some were seasonal and came back to the Hebrides. So the MacLeods generally came back to the Hebrides, although there are rumored to be some branches, such as the McCabe's, that stayed in Ireland. So while heavy campaigning in Ireland, they tend to favor heavy mail, habergeons and that sort of thing, and the axes and all that. While in the West Highlands and most of the funerary effigies show cloth or leather or cloth covered in pitch armor that they call the coton, that's similar to the Akiton or some of the other arming garments that were just used as undergarments in the rest of Europe. They were primary armor in the West Highlands, mostly because of their buoyancy compared to metal mail and their comfort while in the open boats in the very cold ocean. They did prefer to have mail neck guards. Most of the funerary effigies will show an actual bassinet with attached mail on it, whereas this is an earlier style conical helm.
Yeah, from the Norman version because of the style here.
Right. So nasal protection was most common with Normans, but a lot of times there would be one without this that they would call a skull, a steel skull, and that was actually in common use up through the 1600s. So the West Highlands, being sort of a military backwater, kept gear several hundred years obsolete on the continent and through most of Europe, such that one of the chiefs of MacLeod, Alistair Crottoch, has a tomb on the Isle of Harris with some carved, so he died in the mid-1500s, and in one of the carvings he's dressed in this type of armor, which would have been several hundred years out of date, and his actual gravestone has him in plate, but he was a campaigner, a Gallowglass as well, so he would have had plenty of opportunity to loot plate or buy it during the Irish campaigns.
Okay. Now, the Gallowglass were known to technically have worn mail or chainmail a lot, and pretty much. Now, what would they normally have had during the early years? Like, did they have? What type of shield did they have? What type of early weapons did they have?
So, during the Viking period, so basically pre-1266 or so, when the Hebrides still belonged to the Kingdom of Norway, you would have seen either earlier round shields, like the typical Viking-style shield, center gripped. Round shields continued on in the form of something called a targe, which is the Scottish variant of target, which was a medieval target to shoot arrows at, but wood shield that strapped your arm, whereas the center grip was a lot more of an active weapon. It's very similar to a giant buckler. This kite shield is typical of the late Viking period. Most people know it from the Norman stuff, like Bayeux tapestry, but the Lewis chessmen, which were walrus ivory chess pieces found on the Isle of Lewis, dating from around the 1200s, also showed this kind of kite shield, although there were also pieces that had a flat top instead of a round top on it. But a natural extension to cover a bit more of the legs, because horseback was not really common there. It was ship fighting, and so being able to cover your legs, because you generally had bare legs, being able to cover that was a little bit better.
Now, the Gallowglass, they normally wore this type of tunic-like shirt because of hiding daggers and whatnot.
So the Gallowglass during combat would have been wearing armor. Most of the time that they were not in combat, they would have been dressed like the Irish and the Scots of the time, which this garment is called the plural linta, and it's a linen tunic with a long sleeve. Some people say the sleeve was to be able to access the armpit dagger, the skeen ashleis, which could be kept here. A regular skeen or dirk would have been a very long single-edged knife that in Scotland evolved from the Balloch dagger and then turned into the Highland dirk of today. They would have been not using a Highland dirk, it would have been a knife much older than that then, sort of similar to the Viking knives crossed with the Irish skeens.
Huh. Now, how long did the Gallowglass last? Because they lasted from the Viking Age up till the Renaissance, or
Yes, the last of the Gallowglass, the seasonal warriors, ended after the campaign of 1598, primarily because the English warships were too effective at interdicting the galleys that were bringing them over.
Ooh.
And so some English warships sunk a whole bunch of MacDonald galleys, and so the MacLeod contingent was one of the few to make it to shore and campaign. Then the English and Scottish governments, remember they were different at the time, were able to prevail and try to influence the chiefs from sending seasonal warriors over. So that left the Gallowglass, who were servants of various Irish houses, who continued on for a bit longer, but eventually, as firearms became more effective, you didn't need the heavy armored axe fighters nearly as much as you could with some lesser trained folks with muskets. And so that was sort of the die out of the Gallowglass. Generally 1300 to 1600 was the heyday of the Gallowglass. It continued on a little bit. As you went to the 1600s, very few were Scottish anymore. Most were Irish that had previously been kerns or light supporting troops that carried a lot of the Gallowglass equipment. They sort of became the Gallowglass over time, and the West Highlanders that had initially came over sort of went back and did their own thing after that point.
And technically, the sword right back there, it's technically based off of a late Viking Age style, if I'm correct?
Yeah, so the Viking Age style of blade originally
Was it a Norman style?
was a very short, guarded here, and then as time went on, they started making longer and longer ones, so they made it something called a spike hilt.
Oh, so it had the spiked version on it?
So that the guard extending and becoming a spike hilt then became what became the European arming sword. So as a single-handed, heavy, type 10 type of blade turned into, in West Highland and Irish practice, into a slightly lighter type 11 or 12 blade, typically started having a swept forward guard that's characteristic of West Highland type swords. A lot of them had the pommel with the extended tip on it sort of thing there. And you can see it's a little bit longer, a little bit wider, but also has much sharper taper to it. So it's a more agile weapon. This is sort of the type that would be ideal for fighting with a buckler, a small round center grip shield, both as a civilian and a warfare weapon. And then starting in the late 1400s, they added longer and longer grips to them to make a longsword that later became the claymore. So the claymore and the giant two-handed swords are actually Renaissance weapons. The early ones are actually simply no really larger than a regular longsword. The difference between a longsword and a greatsword, a longsword can be carried and drawn from your side, whereas a greatsword is too big and has to normally be carried over the shoulder like this. So if you remember the Dürer engravings of the Gallowglass, the pictures of the guys, they were carrying their swords over their shoulders like this because they were the longer Renaissance variation, since those guys were fighting in the Low Countries in the late 1500s. So a claymore like this is similar to like what would have been on Alistair Craddock's tomb or something of a mid-1500s and earlier type weapon. So it's actually quite light and agile. It's not at all a heavy, clunky one, and can be used in the same style as all German longsword from the period. So German longsword from the period was actually documented, written down in these fight books. And so some people have recreated them today. So they have some very simple positions, and while there's no Scottish sources from really before the 1600s that are written down and documented on Scottish sword styles, and most of those are 1600s and 1700s and later small sword and broadsword, you can assume that they probably used a pan-European style use of the longsword, which is keeping the hands separated for leverage and then using a lot of geometry and leverage to make cuts from both sides of the blades. So with longsword, you have the plow, you have ox, you have from the roof, Vontag, which is and then the Rathstrike, which is the sort of baseball batty looking thing there. And moving between those, whether left ox, right ox, fool, or plow, and then high guard, moving between those basically gives you the basic sword fighting movements. Some of the German masters went further and said that there were master strikes and secret things that were using different grips of thumbing it, twisting it like so, and all that sort of thing. But generally, pretty much anybody who fought with one of these probably could have figured those things out. So, various HEMA schools are trying to actually test out and figure out exactly how they worked. So there's no Scottish primary sources on it. It's recreating it from German sources from the 1500s or so. The 1300s has 133, which depicts this type of sword used with a buckler, and a lot of it is moving the buckler to cover the hand. As gauntlets became more prominent in shield use, you didn't really need to cover the hand as much. Later Scottish swords, like you typically see at a Highland Games, with basket hilts, and that basically removed the need for a buckler because the basket protected the hand from being cut.
All right, and clear.